go into the warm room.
Good afternoon and welcome to the San Francisco Planning Commission regular hearing for Thursday, November 12, 2015. I'd like to remind members of the public that the Commission does not tolerate any disruption or outbursts of any kind. Please silence any mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. And when speaking before the Commission, if you care to, do state your name. For the record, I'd like to take roll at this time. Commission President Fong.
Here.
Commission Vice President Wu.
Here.
Commissioner Antonini.
Present.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Moore.
Here.
And Commissioner Richards.
Here.
We do expect Commissioner Hillis to arrive late. Commissioners, first on your agenda is consideration of items proposed for continuance. At the time of issuance, the agenda had no items proposed for continuance. Since then, item 8 for the Civic Center Public Realm Plan informational presentation is proposed for continuance to January 28th, 2016. And item 10 for case number 2011.0671X at 1395 22nd Street and 790 Pennsylvania Avenue, large project authorization. We've received a request from the supervisor to continue the matter for 2 weeks and a request from the project sponsor requesting a 1-week continuance.
Okay, is there any public comment on the two items proposed for continuance and commenting only on the continuance, not the project?
Trail Boosters Neighborhood Association, and thank you for considering a continuance on 22nd Street / Pennsylvania Avenue. I guess my only concern is we're happy with expediting their hearing again, but let's just look at the recent history. We continued this project once from a date to a date certain. In that intervening time, there was a lot of lobbying happening with you guys, and there were some discussions with individuals in the community, but there was nothing really coming back to the neighborhood association. And so a lot of these open issues, especially on design, left unsolved, and there was this brinksmanship going up to this week. That's happening still. I just got an email saying, hey, let's meet today or tomorrow because we want to be here next week. We presented to you some interim controls last week, a proposal for that. It sounds like they're being taken seriously. We love that. We really appreciate your consideration of that. We're not kidding when we say that we want those controls to be in place before the large project authorizations come in. And we even said in the draft of the controls that we sent to you, we're happy to expedite what's on the calendar. It could be the same day, but we need to make sure that there's teeth. We need to make sure that it's serious. We urge the interim controls to be there as a CU because we wanted that added layer, that added standard, that it had to meet that threshold of the CU, because we want to make sure they actually work with the community, which developers have not been doing with these LPAs. So we don't want to continue putting the horse before the cart, one of the two, whichever it is. You know it is. Thank you. So let's have the controls in place before we start calendaring the project.
Are you supportive of the continuance or not?
Absolutely supportive of the continuance, but not to the date certain.
Thank you.
And I wish there was continuance, frankly, about 1601 Mariposa as well, because I don't see why you would do one and not the other.
We're only speaking to this item.
That's fine. Thank you.
Additional public comment on the two items proposed for continuance?
Thank you, Commissioners. Steve Vettel on behalf of the project sponsor, 1395 22nd Street and 790 Pennsylvania Avenue. I understand the supervisors requested a 2-week continuance. That's Thanksgiving Day, so I don't believe you're meeting that day. Our understanding was she was interested in a 1-week continuance, and that's the only information I have, and that was the reason that we asked for the 1-week continuance. If the supervisor would like more time than that, then I guess 3 weeks would be the appropriate period of time. We do think we'll be ready to go in 3 weeks. We'll be ready to go in 1 week, so would prefer that we do have a short continuance. Thank you.
Thank you. If you can speak into the mic, please.
If I can show an overhead, is
Yep.
it on? So it's down there. How do I turn it on?
Where SFGov TV is.
Okay. So the little red dot is the 790 Pennsylvania project, and all those blue lines are large gas transmission lines that are in Potrero Hill. So part of the challenge with Potrero Hill is all the industrial infrastructure that we're working around. You'll notice that right at the corner of the project, there's a corner of a major transmission line right there. And so when I looked at the document, it didn't have any mention in terms of making sure that there wasn't land movement and stuff and ensuring safety in terms of the infrastructure that exists in that area. So I hope that with the continuance, they'll be able to consider those sorts of things.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comment is closed. And Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, I also spoke with Supervisor Cohen, and I at that particular time, I think we were talking about a 1-week continuance, but certainly if it's her pleasure, I would be willing to do it. But I think at this point, without any certainty, I think a 1-week continuance would be appropriate. We can always recontinue it next week if agreements haven't been reached and if, in fact, the supervisor wants it to be what will be 3 weeks. And as far as the efforts to work on design, I think that's a good thing, but I'm not necessarily feeling projects have to be subject to controls or anything. It would just, improving design is always a good thing, and you can do it individually or projects as a whole, and certainly earlier is better than later. But so I'm going to move to continue it to next week, which is the 19th. That would be item number 10, 790 Pennsylvania.
Do I hear a second?
Commissioner Anthony, there's some other folks who want to chime in on this. Sure. Commissioner Moore.
It is interesting for us to consider continuance, particularly this plain knowledge without the details that the department is strongly working on interim controls. So I think the department is in support of understanding the issue of this particular part of town with 3 neighborhoods which are affected by it, and allow themselves and ourselves to be better informed. Since these projects are tied to large project authorizations, and since they are using tools which we are currently considering also for the affordable housing bonus legislation, I feel that we do really need the department's guidance and sorting out of issues which were never addressed in the creation of the eastern neighborhoods. We all are aware, particularly those 2 commissioners who were around, that the enormous size of rezoning the eastern neighborhoods did not give us any additional time to reflect on that level of detail what judging these particular projects requires. And that is site-specific, more informed understanding of topography, parcel size, height, bulk, and all of those things which come into play here. So I would strongly support the department's ongoing and already in progress effort to create interim controls to guide this commission to take a more responsible look as we are all jointly looking into the future, what these projects do mean, what they can bring, and what they need to do in order to be successful. I support a continuance with a non-specific date, with the department leading the effort on bringing interim control discussions to this commission.
Commissioner Wu.
Thank you. I'm not sure what the timeline for the design controls are, so maybe the director could comment on that. I was going to say, I think that December 3rd seems more reasonable. I wanted to ask staff because how long would it take to get either new drawings or a new staff report? It seems difficult for 1 week.
Correct. If a 1 week continuance, we wouldn't be able to produce a new staff report or analyze any new drawings that would be provided by the project sponsor.
Okay.
I was going to echo what Rich just said, but also with respect to the interim controls, I mean, the interim controls can be put in place by the supervisor fairly quickly if she wants to introduce interim controls. I think there's a bit of a confusion between the interim controls that are being discussed with the community, which are fairly modest, versus the larger urban design guidelines, which will require a little more public vetting and discussion. The hope is that the interim controls will allow us to at least have those discussions within the context of Potrero Hill in the next few months until the full-blown guidelines are adopted. Having said that, I mean, I think the 3-week period would certainly give us time to discuss the interim controls that have been put on the table and how they would apply to this project. I don't think, as Rich said, we could do that in 1 week, just because the drawing production and such would be difficult to do that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Richards.
I move to continue this item to December 3rd.
Second.
Commissioner Antonini.
Oh, I was going to do the same thing.
Commissioner Johnson. Done? Okay.
Can we add the Civic Center Public Realm to January 28th on that motion?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. And then
Thank you.
on that motion to continue item 8 to January 28th and item 10 to December 3rd. On that motion, Commissioner Antonini?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Commissioner Richards?
Aye.
Commissioner Wu?
Aye.
And Commission President Fong?
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0. Commissioners, that'll place you under your consent calendar. All matters listed here under constitute a consent calendar are considered to be routine by the Planning Commission and may be acted upon by a single roll call vote of the Commission. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the Commission, the public, or staff so requests. In which event the matter shall be removed from the consent calendar and considered as a separate item at this or a future hearing. Item 1 for case number 2015-010567 CND at 2466 Francisco Street Condominium Conversion Subdivision. And item 2 for case number 2015-009340 CND at 359 Waller Street, also a condominium conversion subdivision. I have no speaker cards.
Is there any public comment on the 2 items on the consent calendar? Not seeing any. Public comment is closed. Commissioner Richards.
Move to approve items 1 and 2.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioners. On that motion.
No.
On that motion, then, to approve items 1 and 2 under consent, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
Commissioner Wu.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 6-0 and places you on Commission matters. Item 3, Commission comments and questions.
Commissioner Moore.
I wanted to bring the Commission's, and particularly the Department and Director's attention to the fact that a pro-housing council was voted in Mountain View, which changed its position on building only office park and office park expansions, but set aside a 5,000-acre site in Mountain View called the North Bay Shore site for 9,100 housing units. That's a major shift in the previous attitude, which we discussed in the context of talking about ABAG and the support and leadership this department can give to this regional agency. I hope the department, with its extensive experience in high-density housing, placemaking, including governance and program implementation, will lend its advice and helping hand to Mountain View, the South Bay, and ABAG in doing it the right way. This is not just building high density in suburbia, but this is really bringing an element of urbanity, including shared regional responsibility to this particular site. And I ask the director to please take this on. I have a copy of the article and think it's a great opportunity for us to really shine as leaders.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, 25 to 30 years ago, the area immediately north of the Bay Bridge and for about a mile or two to the south was composed of a few remaining industrial uses, a lot of warehousing, parking lots, and in the case of Mission Bay, railroad tracks that were no longer being used. And there weren't a lot of residents in the area, and there were very few businesses with a lot of employees. And when you drove into San Francisco from the East Bay in the 50s, probably most people would either take the Skyway to other parts of the city or they would cross Market Street to the area to the north of market because that area didn't have very many residents and no entertainment uses. It's changed drastically, as we all know. Now there's probably upwards of 10,000 new residents, a lot more on the way, and lots of business uses and lots of entertainment. And unfortunately, our transportation plans, particularly those in terms of parking, are kind of mirrored in the 1950s. The nearest parking garage to the bridge is 5th and Mission, public city parking garage. And a lot of people coming from the East Bay today, and while we encourage them to take public transportation, realistically, many people are going to drive. And many of them are coming to do business or find entertainment or visit friends in that area described, which is fairly close to the Bay Bridge. So what I'm proposing, and I've mentioned this to a number of transportation leaders, if we could get the rendering up there, Jonas, is trying to work with Caltrans to put together a parking garage on the slope of the Bay Bridge between Beale and Bryant on the southern slope there. There already is an off-ramp. Thanks to the firm of Jeff Heller, they put together this mock-up of that garage. There's already an off-ramp for Harrison Street, and it winds underneath the bridge and proceeds to Fremont. But it would be relatively easy to put another lane there that would go into this garage, and then it would descend all the way down to Bryant Street. People would exit on the bottom. Some could go on to Beale and go to other parts of the city, but the vast majority of the visitors would take the turn on to Bryant and go right onto the bridge on an on-ramp that already exists. And for some of friends of mine who come to the city frequently, particularly to go to AT&T Park, always park in that lot that's very close to there because they like the quick return to the bridge. And it would help us a lot in San Francisco because most of our congestion is people trying to make their way from the Bay Bridge to wherever they're going in the city. And with so many of them going to areas that are within walkable distance or certainly public transit from where they are, it would make sense to try to work with the state of California and others to build some sort of intercepting parking facility to minimize the traffic impacts on our city streets.
Commissioner Richards.
A couple of things. First, somebody had the foresight to ask me this week some advice on public comment, and I was thinking, we've had a range of issues, at least since I've been on the commission. We've had people get up here and be incredibly combative with us, lecture us, actually call us racist and everything else under the sun. And my advice back to that person was stick to the facts. Give us your opinion on why the threshold of facts meets the threshold for approval. Please don't be political, didactic, or lecturing. And when you're like that, the message that you're trying to convey doesn't get in the way of the tone of how you're saying it. We're human as well, and I just wanted to kind of remind the public that we'd like to stick to the facts and try to keep everything else out of it. The second thing is, in terms of communicating with the Commission, I personally try to read everything that comes my way, including on social media, but the deluge of communications that we get Thursday morning is almost impossible to get through. I got 28 emails this morning alone, and I think about 40 notifications on Twitter. So if you have anything you'd like for us to hear, your opinion, your position on a project, please try to get it in earlier in the week and give us some time to digest it. Some of the emails that we had several attachments to them, and they were quite long. So I just want to remind the staff that we're human again, too, and we only have so much time in the morning to be able to process what you're trying to give us feedback on. Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Not to start a discussion, but just on Commissioner Antonini's concept. Very interesting, particularly since the MTA has already begun looking at how to do satellite parking for some of the developments in Mission Bay, including the Warriors Arena. But I just wonder how that concept would be used in practice, given that the parking structure that's on Howard and Stewart that we recently approved a development for that would knock that down is lightly used right now. So I just sort of wonder if moving it over a few blocks would really up that usage, but certainly an interesting idea.
Commissioner Moore.
Follow-up comment to Commissioner Richards' thing. Anybody who wants to communicate with the Planning Commission as a body, please remember to CC the Commission Secretary That is the pipeline to getting emails and ideas to staff. Without you seeing them, they are basically comments which disappear and in a pile of non-received emails. I make the effort as often as I can to forward him emails, but it's quite a chore for any commissioner to do that. So please CC the Commission Secretary on your communication.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Just so you know, if they have been sent just to the President, I forward them to Jonas.
And if I don't see him on it, I'll do that too,
correct.
but we are not responsible to.
That's correct.
As a backup.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. If there's nothing further, we can move on to Department Matters. Item 4, Director's Announcements.
Thanks, Jonas. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Just on that point about regional discussions and regional planning and cooperation that Commissioner Moore raised, I do think it's interesting and informative that some of the smaller communities in the region are changing their positions a bit on housing. I have said for a long time, and I will repeat it, that I think that some of the smaller communities have not done their fair share of providing housing in the region, and it's actually one of the solutions to our regional transportation problems to provide that housing. And so I'm happy to hear that Mountain View may be moving in that direction. And just so you know, not only was this part of a kind of, if you recall, when Gil Kelly presented the 5-year work plan for the citywide staff, the regional planning and regional discussions were part of one of the 5 key elements that we talked about. And both and Gil and myself and Anne Marie Rogers have been heavily involved in our further establishing relationships with our counterparts in the other parts of the region, really for the first time in a very, very long time. And so I'm hopeful, and I also will say that we are getting the same from them, and our other regional agencies are reaching out to us. Other agencies, other cities in the region are reaching out to us as well. So there is a spirit of cooperation that I haven't seen in the region in a very long time, and I hope that continues and grows in the coming years. Thank you. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you standing in front of the doorway and on that side of the room, you're creating a fire hazard. I see plenty of seats still remaining. If you could take those seats, and then if you're going to still stand, hopefully none of you will have to stand. I see plenty of seats available. But if you can make your way to the other side of the room, that would be fantastic. That's where they go, yes. All right, Commissioners, we can move on then to item 5, review of past events at the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Appeals and the Historic Preservation Commission did not meet yesterday.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Anne Marie Rogers, Planning Department staff, here to give you your weekly report on board activities. This week there was no full board meeting on Tuesday because of the holiday, but there was a Land Use Committee hearing on Monday, and there were at least a couple of items of interest to you. One was the ordinance that deals with preferences in affordable housing programs, and I gave you an update on what happened last week. They made some amendments consistent with your request. They removed the displaced tenant preference from the ordinance, acknowledging that it would be put in a separate ordinance. And then they also passed your requested amendment to increase the neighborhood preference to 40%. Because they made those substantive amendments, it was continued and reheard again this week. And this week, there was about an hour of public testimony. Some community groups were very supportive of the 40% preference, and other community groups asked for a continuance so that the percentage could be increased to 100%. The Land Use Committee, after hearing public comment, unanimously approved the percentage of 40%. And as I mentioned, your other amendments had been made previously. The current legislation is expected to be heard by the full board next week on the 17th. So the other item that was there was related to one project, 5M. As you know, that is around 5th, 6th Mission and Howard Streets, and it would contain about 700 new dwellings, 800,000 square feet of offices, and an acre of public open space. You heard this item and all the related approvals on September 17th. At that time, you made 16 separate approval actions, and 3 of those actions were considered by the Land Use Committee this week. Planning code and zoning map, changes to the general plan, and also a recommendation to adopt the development agreement. Commissioners, you had asked for a number of changes to the project as to their special use district, all of which were incorporated by the board. These were clarifications regarding the ground floor active uses, imposing the SOMA youth and family SUD controls throughout the project, except for restaurants on the ground floor, restaurants at all. Also adding the conditional use requirement for formula retail and dwelling unit mix requirements that are consistent with the Market Octavia plan. So those were all incorporated. When it came to the development agreement, it was a mixed incorporation. The board did incorporate your request that the project pay $300,000 to fund the adoption of a Filipino cultural heritage district. The board did not incorporate your request for ongoing periodic reporting to the Planning Commission regarding the displacement in the vicinity of the project. Having said that, staff is committed with providing you with updates as we move forward, so you'll be hearing from us on that one. Finally, the board did not incorporate your request to establish a stabilization fund, to increase funding for small site acquisitions, nor to urge that the project incorporate childcare. There were 3 additional significant changes to the project made by the committee. Firstly, the project's affordable housing program was changed to increase the overall percentage of income-restricted units from 33% to 40%, with a heavier emphasis on middle-income housing. Secondly, the project would be more limited in the number of off-street parking spaces it could provide, 331 instead of the 463. And lastly, a requirement was inserted to require that future changes to road widths be extensively vetted by the directors of various agencies and ultimately approved by the Board of Supervisors. So after 3 hours of public comment, the committee advanced the project to the full board, which will be this coming Tuesday. They did so without recommendation, owing to the pendency of the CEQA appeal on the project. On Tuesday, the CEQA appeal will be considered and resolved, along with appeals of the conditional use authorization and office allocations, all associated with the project. So, since there was no Tuesday hearing, that concludes my report, unless there are any questions.
Commissioner Richards.
I guess question for Ms. Rogers. The difference between the 33 and the 40%, given that it's a higher AMI, et cetera, in the public domain, does the value of that exist anywhere? I've asked, people have been asking me, how much is that actually worth?
I'll ask the staff associated with the project and see if we can't get you an answer for that.
And there might be a corresponding loss due to the loss of parking as well. So kind of we got a ledger when we were approving the project on what these were worth. If we can get an updated version of that, that would be fantastic.
We'll look into that. Thank you.
Commissioner Moore.
Off the top of your head, Ms. Rogers, do you know to what parking ratio it was lowered? The numbers seemed around 130. What is the percentage?
No, I have the numbers provided over total spaces, but I don't know the ratio to units.
I would be interested in hearing that at some point.
If I had a
doesn't be right
calculator,
now.
I could figure that out. Oh, okay. All right. We can look into that as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioners, if there's nothing further, we can move on to general public comment, not to exceed a period of 15 minutes. At this time, members of the public may address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission, except agenda items. With respect to agenda items, your opportunity to address the Commission will be afforded when the item is reached in the meeting. Each member of the public may address the Commission for up to 3 minutes. I did receive several speaker cards.
John Bykoff, Ernest Braun, and Nina Saltman.
If your name's been called, feel free to approach the podium.
Hi, my name's Nina Saltman. That's Saltman, and I know that this is a Potrero Hill meeting today, but I'm coming here from Noe Valley. And I came as a member of the Noe Valley organization called Protect Noe Charm, and we have about more than 200 members. And we had a meeting at the library a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to come and let everyone know how dissatisfied people are in Noe about the changes that are taking place in the neighborhood and the overwhelming number of supersized buildings that are being built now. And it is definitely affecting the neighborhood, it's affecting the way that it looks, and it's affecting the way that people feel about the neighborhood. So I wanted to say that, and then I also wanted to talk a little bit about the discretionary reviews, and that people in Noe Valley in particular have been not happy with the way that the DRs have gone through, that we have a pre-application meeting with a sponsor. We go to those meetings, we express our dissatisfaction with certain aspects of the project, and then we don't hear anything else until we get the 311. It's like, this just happened to me. And it was like nothing. I heard zero. I didn't know if any of the things that we had raised objections to had been incorporated into the project. And then we get 30 days to like scramble around and take pictures and make our objections and find out what it is that we can do that would be acceptable to the planners. So the public is sort of kept in the dark about what happens in between the pre-app meeting and the 311. And we were wondering if there's some way that the Planning Commission can address that. At one point, I think I heard that there was a move to reform the DR process. And I have a question to all of you as to what happened to that. Was there going to be some legislation that changed that? So that was one item that I wanted to talk about. And then I wanted to generally say that specific guidelines for, height and depth of a new project are set forth in the building code and in the Planning Commission. But there are residential design guidelines that I think supersede those in terms of sort of an overall, guideline as to like roof lines and density in the area. So these are the sorts of things that Noe Valley residents are most concerned with. And I think that there's also, there is a disparity between those of us that have lived there for a long time and those that are moving in new. I've been in Noe Valley for 27 years. And I've definitely seen the changes taking place on my block. And I know that the new people are just waiting for my husband to die so that they can like move into our house and supersize it.
Thank you, ma'am. Your time is up.
All right. Thank you.
Next speaker, please. Did you want to offer something in public comment?
Hi, Commission. I'm Milo Werner, and I have been the discretionary review applicant for 2720 Lyons Street. And you heard our case twice in the past 2 weeks, and the action memo has now been issued. I have two concerns with the action memo that was issued. The first one is that the elevator penthouse is discussed in it, but there's no specific piece that talks about why the elevator penthouse was allowed. And it was allowed because there was someone who was going to live in the house with disability. And so that piece has been left out of the letter. And my concern is with future cases that come from our neighborhood, this letter will be used in reference for houses that do not have somebody with a disability living in them. So I think that that's really important to include. Another piece is we requested that two sides of the elevator penthouse be transparent, and in the letter it says that those sides are glazed. And so I'd like to request that be changed as well.
Thank you. Is there any additional general public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comment is closed. Commissioner Richards.
Not to start a conversation, but I've been hearing a lot of things from folks from Noe Valley as well as part of all those emails I get, and actually run into people when I'm on 24th Street and we have a conversation. I think there's two discussions here. One would be the project approval process, which leads you to the point where you have to file a DR. So between the time that the project good neighbor meeting happens and the time something actually is concrete, there's a time in the middle where you don't hear anything, and I think that's something that maybe we can discuss with the department on. Maybe a good neighbor policy would be to share the final design a little earlier than when it's 311, so there can be at least a conversation. So anyways, I just throw that out there too. I've been contacted by many people in Noe Valley.
Thank you, Commissioners. If there's nothing further, we can move on to your regular calendar. Item 6 for case number 2012.1398, E at 1601 Mariposa Street, certification of the final environmental impact report Please note that the public hearing on the draft EIR is closed. The public comment period for the draft EIR ended on February 17th, 2015. Public comment will be received. At this time, however, comments may not be included in the final EIR. We will also be calling items 7A and B with the certification for case numbers 2012.1398 E and X at 1601 Mariposa Street, adoption of CEQA findings and large project authorization.
Can you hand these out, Jonas? Good afternoon, President Fong and members of the Commission. I am Chelsea Fordham from the Environmental Planning section of the Planning Department. I'm joined here today by Deviani Jain, Senior Environmental Planner, and Transportation Planners Krista Spiritu and Susan Michelson, also from Environmental Planning. The item before you is certification of the final Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, for the proposed 1601 Mariposa Street project.